Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, the Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krabs.
And we're going to start our wrap-up of 2025 in this episode with our look at back at the Star Wars events from the year, new content of the year, and our favorite Star Wars acquisitions. But before we get into everything that was great about this past year, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media?
Absolutely. So we are going to be the same place in 2026 as we have been in 2025 and before. Facebook and Instagram, very conveniently, Podcast Stardust.
All right. The digital aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield's down. We're now broadcasting to the galaxy. This is our 2025 Star Wars Year in Review. So I've got different categories set up here. And typically when we do these year in reviews, we look back at the new content that came out and then we try and rank it. And honestly, when I was looking back at this content, we discussed a lot of it, but there's also areas where we don't have overlap, where I was looking at something and you weren't, or you were looking at something and I was not. And it just occurred to me that this was not the best year to try and do a consensus top 10 between the two of us. So with that out of the way, we're going to kind of talk about a few different categories of content, and then we'll give our individual top fives for the year. But I think for me, one of the biggest things that happened this year was the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith. Of course, you and I just wrapped up a year-long series breaking down that movie into 10 to 15-minute segments and talking about it with a bunch of our friends and analyzing that movie in crazy detail. But it was also in theaters for a week back on April 25th, 2025. And I know we both got an opportunity to go see it. And, we haven't had a brand new Star Wars movie in theaters for some time. So it was just really amazing to get to go sit in a theater and get the surround sound and watch the pod race in all its glory and watch the duel of the fates between, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul and the like. That for me, that might be the biggest event. It's not new content, but it might have been the biggest event of the entire year.
Oh, and for me, I know I got to see it twice. And I know, like you, it was a wonderful, extraordinary thing to be able to experience that with my son, because this is, the prequels are what our kids, their entry point is, between the prequels and Clone Wars to Star Wars. And so they'd never seen Revenge of the Sith on the big screen. It has been, as you said, so many years since we've had a Star Wars movie on the screen. So I just absolutely loved being able to experience that in the THX, as you said, just being able to see all the glorious detail of all of the things. And I got to see it with my son, and I also got to see it with some teacher friends of mine. So yeah, I didn't get any of the merch though, which is really, really annoying to me, because since I went to two different theaters in two different towns, very much far apart, I thought, okay, I'm going to be able to score something. And I didn't. So that was a real bummer. But yeah, very awesome to be able to experience.
Yeah, that's a good point about watching it with your kids. My oldest was not even 1 when this movie came out. And then, of course, my youngest was not even born when this came out. So being able to go to see it in the theaters with them was particularly sweet. I did get a print of the new poster that they did for this year. So one of the things I had to do in 2026 is get it framed and up on the wall because it's just spectacular. It looks so good. I'm excited to do that.
That's awesome.
Okay, turning to televisions. So it was a fairly busy year on Disney Plus. We had the final episodes of Skeleton Crew that they aired in January. And then we had Andor Season 2, which debuted on April 12th. Tales of the Underworld, all 6 mini episodes came out on May the 4th. We had Lego Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy Pieces of the Past, which we discussed in great detail on this podcast back on September 19th. And then the year ended with Star Wars Visions Volume 3, which debuted on October 29th. And we discussed all those episodes there as well. So, Jay, of the television, what was your favorite from this past year?
Oh, probably no surprise to you or anyone that's listened to this podcast for any length of time. Definitely would be Andor season 2 for me.
Yeah.
And there's just so much value to this show with the storytelling, just the weight of the story, the depth of the characters. I just absolutely, it's Star Wars at its most mature, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's definitely my number one. And I have some close seconds and thirds, but what's your number one?
Yeah, for television, it's definitely Andor season 2. Season 1 was good. It was really
Hmm.
good, but season 2 took it into a whole new level, especially
Oh
the
yeah.
way it just led right into Rogue One there at the end.
Yes.
And so many spectacular moments. I mean, it really expanded on Mon Mothma and beyond whatever they accomplished in season 1. Bill Organa had some great scenes, Saw Gerrera, but introducing K2SO and getting his origin story, even though they overwrote the comic, was fantastic. So yeah, definitely a good number one. For me, number two, as much as I like Skeleton Crew, I'm having a hard time ranking it in this list because I just can't remember how much of we got it in 2025 compared to 2024 in this.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I
That's fair.
absolutely loved that series. It was fantastic. I remember it ranking very high last year when we were doing our year wrap up. But Tales of the Underworld was simply spectacular as well. The backstory to Cad Bane, and then the fate of Asajj Ventress. It's funny, we didn't talk about it at the time, but that was a funny little dichotomy they did there. With Asajj Ventress, it was we got her getting resurrected after she died in the novel, and then for
Right.
Cad Bane, we got his backstory after he died in the Book of Boba Fett. So
Hmm.
uh, died in quotes, I think, but I'm not certain that we've seen the last of him. But at any rate,
Right.
so that was as far as television shows, that was my number two. But how about you?
Yeah, no, I'm with you as far as I kind of jig-jogged back and forth myself between Skeleton Crew and Tales of the Underworld because like you, I mean, for Skeleton Crew, it was just such a fresh type of series. And there was such a great, we talked about that childhood adventure aspect of things. And we often said we don't elevate that necessarily to essential Star Wars, but it's
Hmm.
it's just a fun, kind of stick the landing kind of Star Wars story that is great. But yeah, I'm with you. Tales of the Underworld, I mean, you've got the type of animation that hits so close to obviously Clone Wars type animation, and then the backstories, as you mentioned, with Asajj Ventress and Cad Bane, and just the continuation of their arcs and the way that we were able to get to know them a little bit better. And because you know me, I love a good backstory, a side story, a continuation story. I don't care. And Asajj
Hmm.
is definitely one of my favorites, as I know Kat is definitely one of yours. So yeah, so those are definitely like 2 and 2A for me.
Yeah,
And so it's really hard to decide one over the other. But I'd give the nod to Tales of the Underworld.
definitely. One of the
Yeah.
great things about Skeleton Crew is that it was new content that did not rely on the Skywalker saga. It
Hmm.
did not,
Hmm.
the Jedi were these mythical figures that were in the background, but it took place in that Star Wars galaxy without being dependent on any one particular movie or anything that was happening there. And so I really just kind of appreciated that. And
Hmm.
it was an attempt to tell a brand new story. I mean, it's gotten a mixed reception. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great tone in there, and I would love to see it get a second season, but kind of feels like the longer we go, the less likely that is. But
Right,
anyway,
right. Yeah, and I love the fact that it was also live action because not to
mhm.
take away from anything animated whatsoever, but we just don't get enough live action as far as the series goes. I mean, I know we're getting Ahsoka season 2 coming up and some other things as well, but it was just really refreshing, and I really appreciated the fact that we got that live action.
Yeah. One of the things I struggled with was where I ranked Visions Volume 3.
Mhm.
And it came down to this, is that Ronin, the Ronin story, the dual payback, was one of my absolute favorite pieces of content from the entire year. But then you had Yoku's Treasure or the
Right.
Black thing
Right.
from there that were two of my least favorite in there. And that's the danger of having an anthology series from all these different studios. Some few other good series in there, and you know, I would I could watch stories about the Ronin all day long, and really hope if they get around to doing a volume 4 that they bring them back to do another one. Or, we're getting the Ninth Jedi series next year. Why did we settle on that? why couldn't we have gotten a series about the Ronin? So at any rate, it was just kind of the inconsistent nature of that anthology that really prevented me from ranking it. I think even in my top 3. I think
Mhm.
it's, for definitely Andor, Skeleton Crew, and Tales of the Underworld in some order, and honestly, Rebuild the Galaxy: Pieces of the Past. For as inconsequential to canon storytelling as it is, it's just so much fun, and it's so
Yes.
much more consistent that I can see myself rewatching that more than I see myself rewatching Visions Volume 3 time and again.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. It's got definitely more rewatchability factor. And it's ironic that you said that because I was just talking to someone about Visions and I basically said the same thing. I said, you really want to watch the first episode, and if you haven't seen the original, you need to do that. And
Mhm,
as much as I appreciate what they were trying to do in Visions, it just didn't, again, just didn't stick the landing for me the way that some of these other things. And I want to echo exactly what you said about Lego Star Wars too. It was just good fun. And it was so,
mhm.
I mean, we had so much fun reviewing that. I think I laughed so hard, when
Yeah.
we were going through some of those, and just the giddiness and just the feel good aspect of that is definitely something that is a gift.
As much fun as it was, that was also one of the hardest things to talk about on the show, because at some point you get caught up in repeating jokes.
Yes.
And it's not as funny when we say them as when you see them on the screen. And so
Like, you had to
that's
be there kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, yeah, well, that's true. But it's like, at the end of the year, I'm trying to reflect on what we did in this podcast and what I can do to be better as a host and what we can do to make the show better. And I was like, I would do a review of Lego Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy: Pieces of the Past all over again, but it's like, would I do it the same way? Because we talked a lot about the references, and I think that works, but it's hard to talk about the jokes where it's you ever have someone try and tell you about a comic strip where it's like in the
Right.
first panel he says, and then blah blah blah, and the punchline is like, yeah, that's not funny. Well, you had to see the comic strip. It's the same thing. As much as you're laughing
Mhm.
about it, it's like we can't convey the joke. You had to be there, like you just said. So
Uh-huh.
at any rate,
Indeed.
well, let's move on to books here. And there was a lot. There was several books this year,
Yeah.
and I left out all of the art of type things and behind the scenes type things, and I'm just talking about the narrative storytelling that's happened. So we had the end of the High Republic with Into the Light by Claudia Gray. That was the last young adult novel, and that was the Blight appearing on Kashyyyk was the backstory of that one. We had A Valiant Vow by Justina Ireland. That was the middle grade novel. I read the last two middle grade novels almost back to back, and honestly, I can't remember what happened in one and not the other. I just know it had a little hutlet in it that okay, well, the audio version of that did not do that hut any favors. I preferred my own voice for that
Ah.
hut. But anyways, that came out on May 6th. And then the finale, Trials of the Jedi by Charles Soule, came out on June 17th. Elsewhere, we got Reign of Empire, The Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed, which came out in February. We had a Bad Batch novel, which was called Sanctuary by Lamar Giles, that came out in August. There was The Acolyte Wayseeker, also by Justina Ireland, which featured Vanessa Rowe and Indara, that came out in May of this year. We had another Acolyte tie-in, which is called The Crystal Crown by Tessa Gratton, which came out in July, and that featured Jecki and Yord. So, everyone's favorite shirtless Jedi, and then the slaughtered Padawan. And then we had a Master of Evil.
Sorry, go ahead.
Give you a second there. Master of Evil by Adam Christopher, which came out in November. I'm halfway through that. I'll have to ask you about that in a second.
Okay.
And then The Last Order by Kwame Mabalia, which features Finn and Jen. I have it. Came out on October 21st, but I have not started it yet. So some of these we talked about. I read Wayseeker and liked it well enough. I have not read Crystal Crown. Have you read either one of those?
No, I haven't. And when I saw these on the wrap up, I thought, oh gosh, I completely forgot that I need to pick these up. But of course, there's only so many hours in a day. But, out of the two of those, I think I really would love to get back into the Wayseeker, with the High Republic stuff. So not to take anything away from Jackie and Yord, but I can never get enough High Republic. So
Yeah, and I did
yeah.
read Wayseeker, and it really does feel like a distant epilogue to the High Republic. There's
Okay.
a number of other characters that I won't spoil it for you, but there are other characters and references to things that happened to the High Republic that it was a good transitional novel for me from the High Republic to the Acolyte. There, I mean, the Acolyte came out in 2024, and there were things we loved about it and other things that we wished were better, but they just
Sure.
waited so long to finally give us the resolution of all that. But with these
Hmm.
tie novels, I have not read The Crystal Crown. I don't even know if I have a copy of it around here. I'm gonna have to check on that. But that's on my to read list. I have not read The Last Order yet, as I just mentioned, by Kwame Mabalia. Where are you with Master Yule? Have you gotten into that at all?
I have. I'm not super far. I had actually started on the audio version of that,
Mm-hmm.
and then I put it on hold at my local library, and it honestly, I just picked it up today. So it
Oh.
was forever before it actually came around to my turn to be able to pick it up. And then I actually did have The Last Order by Kwame Mabalia sitting here from the library, and I never cracked it open just because it's been the holidays. And so I had to return it because the due date, I was actually a couple days overdue, but they didn't charge me for it. Thank you, local library.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm really excited to get deeper into Master of Evil. And you said you're about halfway at this point?
Yeah, I've been almost exclusively doing the audio book of it, so I'm about 60%,
Okay.
and I don't know what I think of this book. And I don't want to do the podcast about this book before we do the podcast about this book, which will probably be, since you're just now, really starting to get into, it's probably gonna be into January, would be my guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll say this: they promoted this book as about being, uh, they promoted this book as being about Darth Vader.
Hmm.
And yes, he's a key figure in this, but it's really about a member of the Crimson Guard, of the elite Royal Guard,
Okay.
the commander in this. And
Okay.
he kind of, without spoiling much, he kind of gets assigned by a member of the ISB and the Emperor to keep tabs on Vader while Vader is doing some stuff there. And there's huge chunks of this book that Vader's not even in. And there's
Mm,
only small parts where we're getting the story from his perspective. And we covered one of those on the news a few weeks ago.
mm,
So at about, like I said, about the 60% mark, there's something very clever that Adam Christopher has done. And I'm interested to see what happens from here in this book. But I
okay.
do kind of feel like it's retreading some ground that we've already covered with Darth Vader in other places. And while Holland Goth, who's this member of the Royal Guard, he's actually the commander of the Royal Guard, is an interesting enough character. That's not why I picked up this book. So,
Mhm,
at
mhm.
any rate, so
Yeah,
that's
I
just
just
kind of
got
my,
introduced to him, so that's ironic. Okay,
yeah. So that's my
got a
preview
book.
to the discussion that we're likely going to have sometime in 6 weeks from now, would be my guess. But okay, other books. High Republic for me, Into Light was good. I enjoyed what Clyde Gray did there with Blight. Valiant Vow, I don't feel like that's necessary at all if you're into the High Republic. But Trials of the Jedi by Charles Soule was a masterpiece. I
Mhm. Totally.
that probably is my favorite book of the year, and we've got two more books I want to discuss in a second. And one of those also ranks highly for me. But what did you think of our offerings from the High Republic this year?
Oh, definitely Trials of the Jedi. Number one for the High Republic for me. And I will say I did really, really enjoy Into the Light though, but I
Hmm.
also loved the Into the Dark by Claudia Gray as well.
Hmm.
And I just really love Reed Silas's character. I liked I love the planet hopping that we got to do in Trials of the Jedi because there was just so much going on, and that was Mark Rowe, front and center, and a lot of that book where we didn't get that in Into the
Hmm.
Light. But I loved Reed Silas in that one. I loved the idea of being on Kashyyyk, wrapping up the whole Dranger thing and the blights, being able to kind of wrap up some of the storylines and plots, being able to say goodbye to certain characters and kind of wrap up their storylines, and then still leave a little bit to the imagination. But I'm with you as far as the High Republic goes. Trials of the Jedi is gold. I mean,
Oh yeah,
truly, truly gold. But there's another book that overall had my heart this year, and I bet you
I
can guess what it is.
yeah, and so the other two books we haven't discussed yet here in this wrap up are Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed, and The Bad Batch Sanctuary by Lamar Giles. And Jay, tell everyone why you loved Bad Batch Sanctuary by Lamar Giles so much. No, I'm kidding. I know you're going to talk
Actually,
about
that's my third.
yeah. I know you're going to talk about Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear by Alexander Freed.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, I'll let you go first on that one, but talk about that.
Okay, talk about a masterpiece. I mean, we have referenced this book so many times this year in light of other things that we've either watched, rewatched, tie-ins that we've been able to make, even into things like Revenge of the Sith, back even into Clone Wars and everything. And it's just some of the most powerful storytelling I feel like we've gotten from a book that is, as far as for me anyways, is right up there with Andor in terms of the weight of the story. And for me, I love the character driven kinds of things where, yes, I love action scenes and I love all of the lightsabers and I love the space battles and that type of thing. But for me, it was about the characters. So for Bail and Mon Mothma specifically, and their choices that they had to make, the morals and ethics that were on the table, the weight of the inevitable that's happening, and just the way that the empire is taking over at this point and their role in this whole thing from those perspectives just blew me away.
Mhm.
And I absolutely love this book. And this is one of my top books of all time for Star
Oh
Wars,
wow.
quite honestly.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I would rank it up there in my top 10 of all time for sure. So, yeah,
I hadn't thought
what
about.
did you like
Well, I no, I
about it?
enjoyed it quite a bit. I mean, you nailed it when you're talking about how many times we referred to it over the course of this year, and this year was ripe for that. I mean, with the
Mhm.
our Revenge of the Sith series, it came up all the time. With Andor season 2 having rolled out, the tie-ins in there were obvious. So it was a constant reference for us. And what surprised me is that I don't think Alexander Freed's other Star Wars work has been bad, but it's been so much grittier
Yeah.
and than what I prefer out of Star Wars books. And honestly, at times it's like almost anxiety inducing what he puts his
Mhm.
characters through.
Mhm.
But he really did a good job outlining those days right after the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, and what Mon Mothma and Bail Organa and Saw Gerrera and the other characters there were going through, and so that transitional period, and it was powerful. And he did a really fantastic job. And I still would love to know what he got to know about Andor and the like before he wrote that book. But it ranks very high for me. And um, yeah, I really hadn't stopped to consider where it fits in my overall rankings of all Star Wars novels, but it is it is a good one, and it's probably my favorite Alexander Freed book, without a doubt. So, at any rate,
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
and what's ironic is I'm not, as far as Alexander Freed's other works, like
mhm,
Alphabet Squadron, wasn't the biggest fan of those.
yeah,
So for this to be, as and I've always appreciated his storytelling though. He's so vivid
Mhm.
And, he can make a blade of grass sound like a piece of art. You know what I mean? So I got to give it to him for that too, and everything that he does.
Yeah, Alphabet Squadron is a mixed bag for me because there's some really incredible action scenes there. I like what he did with Hera and her appearances in that. But at times it's just like I have my own problems to deal with. I don't need to be so buried deeply in these characters' problems on top of it. So at times it was
Well
difficult, but
said.
yeah,
Yeah.
but at any rate, it's but this was next level for him.
Hmm.
The last book we hadn't really talked about is the Bad Batch Sanctuary, or Sanctuary Bad Batch novel, I guess is how it's on the cover there by Lumber Growls. We talked about that book with Greg Cass on the show, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's as far as Bad Batch stories, it's a good one. It's not like one of the top star Bad Batch stories, and frankly, for tie-in work, I think it suffers because Reign of the Empire was just so good
Hmm.
by comparison. And while this was a perfectly good story, it was just not an elite level story.
Hmm. And I think what really contrasts this book for me from The Mask of Fear is just the fact that it is not as heavy of a story. I feel like this is, especially with being the Bad Batch, it almost feels like coming home in a lot of
Hmm.
ways, because we so love the Bad Batch, and it's those storylines and it's that animation style, that it's a different feel of storytelling. And so for me, it was fun to listen to because the story was engaging enough. It was a good enough story that I was invested in it. But, at the end of the day, it was more like okay, that was fun to listen to. Whereas
Yeah,
like The Mask of Fear is just, like I said, it's just so powerful, which I love. I'm honestly, obviously, because I ranked it so high. But it just does contrast very much with Sanctuary in that way.
indeed, indeed. Okay, so yeah, and obviously we just can't give the Last Order any type of review because neither one of us read it, so it's on our it's
Right.
our to read pile. We really didn't do that much with comics this year. We basically invested our comic energy into the High Republic series by
Hmm.
Kevin Scott, which
Right.
was great. And we had that last epilogue issue, which I guess you could argue is actually the finale for the High Republic, where Keith Trennis leaves the Jedi Order and the
Hmm.
like. But something I've been really meaning to put some time aside for is the Legacy of Vader series that Charles Soule has been reading. It focuses on Kylo Ren and that time period between the Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker, and what he's up to during then. But
Hmm. Hmm.
hopefully, we can find some time to revisit that or visit that to begin with in 2026.
Yes, I would love that because that's definitely, there's only so many things that we can do content wise, and there's so many hours in the day, and our Star Wars cup definitely runneth over, which is a good thing, but
Mm-hmm.
we can't always get to everything, obviously. So, but
Yeah,
yeah, let's do that one, please.
in a week or two, we'll be talking about our 2026 preview, and so we'll be getting into some of the things that we're going to have to be covering
Right.
as things come up. So we'll see.
Exactly.
And the Jedi Knights series seems to be well received, but we just kind of, again, things I just can't find the time for right now. It's weird. It's seldom the day goes by that I don't engage with Star Wars in some capacity, whether it's podcasting with you or writing the notes, looking at Star Wars news, reading a Star Wars book, reading a Star Wars comic, watching a Star Wars movie, an episode of one of the series, or whatever the case is. But it's just finding time to add, uh, like you just said, our cup runs over with Star Wars content. It's just gotten impossible to do it all
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
And back in 2015, when they relaunched Marvel Star Wars comics, I was so on top of it. But there's so many of them that come out now on a monthly basis. I don't know how people do it. That they can just put aside all that time to keep on top of everything. But I am so many issues behind across Star Wars comics, which just boggles my mind compared to where I was, just a few years ago. So
Right. Yeah, and some people may say, well, why do you guys go back and rewatch the Clone Wars? You could be covering some of these other comics. Well, Clone Wars is comfort, number one, I
Oh
feel
yeah.
like. And it's something that we can easily jump back into. And it's fun to revisit. It's something that it's kind of our comfort zone, as I said, kind of a thing. And we'll get to some of those comics. We will,
Oh, definitely,
I'm sure.
definitely. So, of course, this year we also had Star Wars Celebration Japan, and the big two pieces of news that came out of there were the announcement of Maul Shadowlord coming out sometime in 2026 as our next animated series, and then the announcement of Starfighter, which was announced and filmed and wrapped all in 2025, and we have a May of 2027 release date for that. So I don't know, it was. I would have loved to have gone Star Wars Japan, but that simply was not in the budget, and not. I didn't have that time available on my calendar to boot on that. All that being said, it looks like it was a great time, by everyone who went. It looks like it was a great time for everyone who did, in fact, get to go. But I just kind of feel like the news coming out of it was a little bit less than what we usually get.
No, I totally agree. And a lot of it was revisiting different things and nostalgia factor for some things, which is great.
Hmm.
But yeah, just the new, as you said, the Shadow Lord Mall series, which I'm so looking forward to. And then Starfighter, yeah, were definitely the two biggest things. And still can't believe, I mean, I'm pinching myself that, as you said, Starfighter was announced, filmed, and wrapped all in 2025, which never
Hmm.
happens with Star Wars. So
Yeah.
yay.
And we still have 18 months before we get to see it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
It'll be here
Um,
before we know it, though. I mean, it's crazy how time flies.
mhm. So the last thing that I've got as a category here in our wrap up for the year is simply that, you do the notes and gather all these Star Wars fashion and lifestyle product type finds and like that. So we're collectors at heart. We each have our own different type of collections, stuff like that. So, you know, what did you acquire as a piece of Star Wars merch this year? You know, what was your favorite? What were some highlights of things that you acquired over the course of the year?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I didn't really get a whole lot this year. It's funny because we were talking about, our acquisitions, and I honestly had to go back through some of my old World Between Worlds notes to see what did I get this year. And I did get some great gifts from my son and my now daughter-in-law for Mother's Day, one of which I use on a daily basis, and that is my Ahsoka series oversized mug that has like all the little chibi characters on it. So, it's got Ahsoka and Chopper and Hera, to name a few. And so that one is definitely by far my favorite, just because it's something that I use every single day. And then I think my little vintage Darth Vader mug that I got gifted to me from a custodian at the school from where I retired just this last year is probably my second favorite thing, because I've been trading out what I've been putting in it. So I don't actually drink out of it. I had succulents in it, and now I've traded it out for my Christmas holly, that's coming out of the top of it. So I see it every single day, and it's just a really sweet reminder of my former life, if you will. It's really weird because this year has been like my January to May J is very different from my like June to December J.
Yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And it's just been
Sure.
a real life-changing kind of thing. So that's definitely a big one for me. But for me, I think that my favorite acquisitions were my experiences. So, we talked about the Revenge of the Sith being back in theaters and getting to see that in a couple of different ways. And then I got to go to, here in Columbus, Ohio, is the Center of Science and Industry, or COSI for short. So they had this fun exhibit called Unofficial Galaxies that I got to go with a couple of my Star Wars teacher friends, and we just had a blast going through the exhibit and taking photos in the garbage masher and trying some of the fun beverages and themed foods that they had, and that type of thing. And then the one and only appearance that I had this year for cosplay, which is so weird to say, was it was sponsored by Sweets and Geeks, and it was at Great Northern Mall up in Cleveland, where I got to be Hera, and I had my own merch table. And then I did this really fun reel in Dick's Sporting Goods with a fellow cosplayer from Rubber City Cosplay. And that was just a heck of a lot of fun. So, those experiences just really, really stuck with me. So I'd say as far as acquisitions, my memories are the most fun. So there you go. But what about you? What were your favorites for this year?
I appreciate the way that you interpreted that question to get those experiences in there. But yeah, I talk a lot about being a Star Wars Lego fan, and so I had some new additions to my collection, and there's a few that I still haven't even built yet. But putting together the C-3PO model was fun. I've got the chopper model that I did, but my favorite one that I built this year was the TIE Interceptor. That is just an incredible model, and that was fantastic. But and my wife is behind all these things when it comes to my acquisitions, and I get them for gifts for Christmas, for birthdays, for Father's Day, and the like. But the thing that I don't think I had any idea that I would get as much use out of and appreciate as much as I do is the Star Wars ice molds, the Darth Vader
Yeah.
and Stormtrooper molds. I use those multiple times a week. I'm always getting those things out to make a cocktail with. And I mean, just before we recorded, I sat down and made myself an old fashioned and used one of those Darth Vader
Nice.
molds. So yeah, I would not have guessed that in 100 years at the beginning of the year. That would have been something that I would enjoy so much, but it's been fantastic. And yeah, so like I said, surprised me. So there we are.
Awesome.
Okay, well, that is everything that happened. So with all of that having been said, let's go ahead and we can each rank our top 5 for the year. Jay, I'll give you the floor first. What is your top 5 pieces of Star Wars content for the year?
Well, the way that I was trying to think about these is if I didn't have this in my Star Wars life, would I miss it? And so that's kind of the way that I approach this for my top 5. And so I think as far as what we got new this year, I would put Andor season 2 as my number 1 piece of content for Star Wars this year, because honestly, I am so glad we got this. And if that were somehow removed, my memory was wiped like C-3PO's, that would be really sad. So
Mhm.
that's going to be number 1 for me. Number 2 is Trials of the Jedi from Charles Soule. Even though I love Mask of Fear, and I said that I would put that in my top 10, and that's number 3. Okay, just saying. That particular book, just being the exclamation point, the ending, whatever you want to call it for the High Republic, is just so heartfelt for me, as far as it just hits me where I live, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's something that I definitely would not want to live without, for sure. So I'd say, Andor, and then Trials of the Jedi, Reign of the Empire. I'm definitely going to put the Visions episode, The Ronin, Duel the Payback, as number 4.
Okay.
Because that one for me is, as much as I love Visions and I love that particular storyline, it is something that if I never had it ever, I would miss it, I guess. You can't miss what you don't know that you don't have, but it wouldn't leave as big of a hole for me as not getting some of this other content could have, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah.
And then I would say probably number 5. Gosh, that's a hard one. Oof. Where do I go with this? All right, game time decision. I'm gonna go with Tales of the Underworld,
Okay.
because I love that animation style, and once again, I just love and appreciate having those backstories. So I guess that's my number. Those are my 5 for content.
Yeah. So I did not break out the Dual Payback away from Visions Volume 3.
Okay. I cheated.
No,
Sorry.
no, no. There was no criteria for coming up with this list. I just told you to give me your top 5, and that's what you did, and I completely respect that. And so, yeah, the dual payback does not appear in my top 5 because the way I was creating my list, I could not divorce the one episode, the one installment from the entire thing.
Hmm.
But I'll go down and say it was in fact, one of my favorite things, Star Wars, from the entire year. I've watched it so many times and adore it, absolutely adore it. But again, I was trying to think of projects as a whole, and that does not invalidate your list at all. Your list is your list, and mine is mine. And like I said, we didn't exchange any criteria before we created these lists.
Hmm.
So that being said, I love that you included it in yours, but because of the way I was doing mine, I just did not. So I'm going to do mine in reverse order. 5 was Skeleton Crew, and I love that series. As we were talking about it earlier, I just love the imagination that was behind it. It was not burdened so much by everything that came before. It had all that stuff as a backdrop, but it didn't concern itself with making Luke Skywalker or some other Jedi that we knew show up, despite the fact that Wim was such a huge Jedi fan and the like. And so it told a fun story. Uh, really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I debated whether to put it in this list or not because a huge chunk of this took place in 2024, but it concluded in 2025. So there it is. Number 4, and I'll also say this list has changed so many times since I started it today. I think I've revised it 4 or 5 times. But number 4 is Reign of the Empire, Mask of Fear.
Hmm.
And at one point on my list, this was 2. And why did I put it 4? I just don't know. And I think maybe because I don't know that I'm ever actually going to go back and reread this book. At some point I will, but other things on my list are things I am going to revisit over and over again, multiple times. I know I will. And
Hmm.
so that's why is as impactful as it was, that's why it just didn't rank higher on my list. Is where I decided to put where it is. Number 3 is Tales of the Underworld. I love the Darth Bane and Asajj Ventress stories. I think it's brilliant the way that they do these Tales series every year and pick 2 characters and then compare and contrast them through some similarities and then what their ultimate outcome is. And so that one was a big hit for me. Number 2, Trials of the Jedi. You nailed it when you talked about it. It is such a great capstone on the High Republic experience. It brought so many storylines to a close, gave a very satisfying end to this saga that we started. Originally, we were supposed to start in 2020, but it didn't start until 2021. But we've been reading this for most of 4 years, and we've been so invested. We just talked about all the adult novels, all the young adult novels, so many of the comics, the audio dramas, and everything else. And Charles Soule nailed the landing. So
Hmm.
bravo to him. He's brilliant. He's one of those minds that can tell a Star Wars story, and he's in the top tier when it comes down to it. So,
Truly. Hmm.
and then I don't think it's going to be a surprise what was number 1, and that is Andor season 2. Um, Great storytelling from start to finish. I think it excelled over season 1 in that it did more directly tie into things that we'd seen elsewhere in Star Wars, especially Rogue One, and brought us right up to the beginning of that movie. Uh, Gave us some hope. Yes, we all know what happens to Cassian Andor during Rogue One, but we know Bix has his child there.
Right.
And so that just
Yeah.
how poetic that was at the end. And then getting to see K2SO and the fantastic scenes with Mon Mothma, especially when she gives her speech in the Senate. You
Hmm.
can just go through, Luthen Rail and his fate and, what was going on with Clea and those characters. There's so much great stuff that happened in that series. And so it's kind of sad it's over. I mean, originally that was
I
going to be 5
know.
seasons, and then they brought it down to 2 and who can blame them as long as it was taking to do. But yeah, that's Star Wars storytelling at its peak. And Tony Gilroy and company did
Indeed.
a fantastic job with it. So
Indeed.
there we are. That's our top 5s. That wraps up our 2025 review of Star Wars
Whew.
here. Any other final thoughts on that before we put a bow on the show?
It's just crazy that here we are, Dennis, with another year of Star Wars under our belt.
Mm-hmm.
And we are not losing any steam going into 2026. And we're going to have so much more to talk about. and so many more exciting things. And yeah, I mean, 2025 has been amazing in a lot of ways. And we're only going to keep raising the bar, which I
Yep.
love. I'm so
Yeah,
looking
we
forward
got
to it.
a huge 2026 coming up, and we'll be,
Yeah,
like I said, setting that up here in just a couple weeks. So make sure you stick around for that.
indeed.
Okay, well then, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and another year of Podcast Stardust here in 2025. Year's not over; we got a few more episodes to go, but this is our cherry on top, as Jay put it, for our look at Star Wars for the year. And thank you all for joining us and being with us from start to finish. So we hope you enjoyed it, and if so, as I like to say every episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already. We're available, or we should be available on every podcast platform out there. And if we're not, let me know and I'll see what I got to do in order to get us on that platform. And we greatly appreciate your ratings and reviews. That helps get the show in front of more people. And if you want to catch the entire back catalog, all previous 980 episodes, one of the best places you can do that is over at retrozap.com. We have our own page there, and all the shows can be found. It's pretty easy to search for the most part if you're looking for something that we may have talked about. And if you can't find it, reach out to us and I'll tell you where it is. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Absolutely. So we are very easily found at Podcast Stardust on all of your socials. So that includes Facebook and Instagram, YouTube and YouTube Music, where you can also subscribe to the show and also leave us your reviews and interactions as well. So please hit us up. Let us know what you thought of 2025 in general. How did you think of our rankings? Do you have anything to add? Do you have any piece of content that was your favorite? We would love to know. So you can hit us up on those. You can also drop us a line at our email, which is podcaststardust@gmail.com. And you can also send us questions as well. We're still looking for listener questions that we can put together into an episode and do that in 2026 as well. And if you'd like to outfit yourself in Podcast Stardust swag or pick up a coffee mug, you can do so at TeePublic. And the link to that is in our show notes. And we've got 7 different show logo designs to pick from. So you're bound to find something that you like. And then we also are available on, as Dennis said, all of your other streaming platforms. So we're on Spotify and Audible and all of the things. So, and as he said, if you can't find us, let us know because we will get there. We are binding the galaxy together with our podcast episodes. There you go.
Okay, so upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we're getting in the holiday spirit with a Star Wars gift episode. So it's a tradition that we've been doing now for a few years. And then Friday is a little bit up in the air because we're going to be recording really early next week. So if there's enough news, we'll be covering news. If not, we'll be doing something else. What will that be? Stick around and find out. So with that said, thanks for listening to episode 981 of Podcast Stars. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force